Hello there, and welcome to a brand new episode of Needlepoint TV. I'm Ellen Johnson, and I'm your host. So today we're going to talk about shading with decorative stitches. There is a blog post over on the Serendipity Needleworks website, and let me go ahead and share the website for you. That's the Serendipity Needleworks website. So hop over and check out that blog post after we get done with our Needlepoint TV episode today, all about the diagonal Romanian stitch. But in a nutshell, the diagonal Romanian stitch is a crossed stitch. That means there are two layers of thread that are layered on top of each other, and it is an awesome stitch that you can use for shading on your needlepoint canvases. Now, of course, you can use lots of other decorative stitches on your needlepoint canvases for shading, but this one in particular, I think, is especially effective. So some of the other uses some of the uses rather, for the diagonal Romanian stitch are clothing, animal fur, bird nests. I've got my notes over here. I have to look. Rivers and trees. And of course, now that we're going into the fall season, all of the trees are, well, not all of them, but a lot of them are starting to change colors. Here in Alabama, it's going to be probably November before we start to get the color changes. But I have a friend in Boston who said that it's already very fall like up there. So, anyway, all that to say, beautiful, beautiful fall colors are on the horizon for us and maybe already there for some of you. So I'm going to pop over here really quick so I can see the comments. I would love for you to share with me where you're watching from. And if you're watching this as a recording, please tell me that as well, where you're watching from as well. So if you have questions, type them in all capital letters so that I can go back and make sure that I get your questions answered. It's a lot easier for me to find them if they're typed in all capital letters. And so let's just dive right in. So we talked just a second ago about some of the different uses for the diagonal Romanian stitch. Now, there are some color combinations. I tend to like very subtle changes in color so that you've got that real subtle shading. I think that's much more effective. One of the things that you want to keep in mind when you're shading on your needlepoint canvases is what is the light source that's hitting that particular design component, because where you're going to put your lighter colors is really where that light is hitting first. Think, for example, if you had a pumpkin. If you had a pumpkin and the light was coming in from the right, from the part that would be shaded, or that would be the lightest, actually would be the part that's at the closest to that light source. And then as you move around the curve of that pumpkin, the next shade would be just a little bit darker because it's not directly in line with that light source hitting it just spot on. And then the further around you go, the darker that object is going to get because it's a curved surface, it's further away from the light source. So anytime, even if you don't have a canvas that has a tremendous amount of shading on it, you can actually create your own shading by using that principle. What's the light source? Where is it coming from? And then change your colors, or do the color gradient based on that particular concept. All right, so I'm going to show you how to do the diagonal Romanian stitch. We're going to watch a video actually, and I'm going to have to get you to bear with me because I actually should have practiced this, but I forgot. We're going to watch a video on how to do the diagonal Romanian stitch from our Stitchers Club How to Stitch library. So let me see. Let me pull it up. I'm going to have to hop over here. We're going to, yikes, share the screen. Okay, here we go. We're going to share the screen, and we're going to share the screen, and it's going to be this one right here. No, that's not it. Hold on. Wrong one. There it is. Okay. Whew. Okay, here we go. So let me pull this back down and let's watch this video on how to do the diagonal Romanian stitch. Hi there. This video is all about the diagonal Romanian stitch. Now, this is a really fun stitch. and it looks a lot harder than it actually is. So what do you say we give it a try? Okie dokie, I have my needle and thread to the front of the canvas where I actually want to start stitching. So this is a true diagonal stitch in that it's worked over the same number of horizontal canvas threads as it is worked over vertical canvas threads. So to get the first stitch in place for this first row, now that I've got my needle and thread to the front, I'm going to count over 3, 1, 2, 3, and up 3, 1, 2, 3, and then take my needle through to the back. So because I'm working over 3 and up 3, then that tells me that it is a true diagonal stitch because it's worked over the same number of vertical canvas threads as it is worked over horizontal canvas threads. Now, this is the fun part. This is a tied stitch, so that means that the first stitch that we made is going to be tied in place with another stitch that's going to anchor it down. And we're working each one of these stitches as a unit. So we're not going to work all of the diagonal stitches and then come back and do the tied stitches. We're going to do the diagonal stitch and then we're going to tie it down. All righty. So what we want to do is we're going to tie this down. Let me just show you this real quick. So you can see we actually worked this over 2 canvas holes. It's over 1, 2, 3 canvas intersections. So what we want to do is find that middle canvas intersection and tie the stitch, this long stitch, down with a short tent stitch. And it's going to be a left leaning or a reverse tent stitch because it's going to be worked in the opposite direction of a standard tent stitch. So I'm going to bring my needle up to the front and then take a backwards tent stitch or a reverse tent stitch to tie that stitch down. And that's all there is to it. Super easy. And this stitch gives lots of texture to your canvas. So it's a really fun stitch that you can use in a lot of different places. Okay, now let's work the next one. So in order to work the next stitch in this row, what we're going to want to do is find our starting point of this very first stitch that we made, and we're going to come down 1 canvas thread and over to the right 1 canvas thread. So bring your needle through to the front there, and then we're going to go over to the right 1, 2, 3, and up 1, 2, 3. Take your needle through to the back, and there's your long diagonal stitch. Now, this is where it gets super easy because once you get your first stitch in place, you can use that as a visual cue. So I know that these stitches that are the tie down stitches are going to share holes. So that just tells me right away, without me even having to really look at the diagram, that my next tent stitch is going to fit right there because it's going to share a hole with the first one that I made. Okay. Easy peasy. Here we go. So now we're going to, and you can see too that these are being worked in a diagonal row, hence the name. We're going to come down to this next open diagonal, or excuse me, this next open hole in this diagonal row, which is also down 1 canvas thread and over to the right 1 canvas thread. So we'll bring our needle through to the front and count over 1, 2, 3, and up 1, 2, 3. Take your needle through to the back, and then let's work that tie down stitch. So you can see how the pattern, once you get the first few stitches in place, is super easy to just do without even having to look at a stitch diagram because all the stitches are lining up in diagonal rows. The one time I would recommend that you do, of course, pay close attention to your stitch diagram. Well, 2 times actually. One is if you're very new to using decorative stitches on your canvas, and the other is when you're switching from one row to the next because you want to make sure that you get the placement right so that your rows don't get out of whack. Okay, let's work just a few more of these so you can see how the pattern is going to be established. Here again, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Take my needle through to the back and then do that little tie down stitch in the middle. Whoops, well darn, there we go. Take that to the back. And let's do one more just for good measure. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 to make that true diagonal stitch. And then let's do that little tie down stitch. Now, to work the next row, going back up the hill, what we're going to do is we are going to find the starting point right here of this last stitch that we just did, and we're going to come down 1 canvas thread and over to the left 2 canvas threads, 1, 2. Bring your needle through to the front, and again we're going to go over 1, 2, 3, and then up 1, 2, and it's kind of hard to see it in there, but there it is. So we're going to take our needle through to the back. And the visual cue that's pretty cool about this is that this stitch with this particular row, your stitches are going to, the end of your stitch is going to share a hole with these little stitches that made the, or that tied down the long stitches in the first row. So again, visual cues you can use to help you stay on track. Okay, so now let's tie off this stitch in the middle. Bring your needle through to the front and tie that stitch off. And you can see there too that this stitch is sharing a hole with the long stitches in the previous row. So super, super easy. Gets a bad rap sometimes. People say, oh, that looks so hard, but it's really not. So we're going to count, let's count up 3. 1, 2, 3. It's easier to see. And then over 1, 2, 3. So we're going to go down into that little space right there. Excuse me, and do our tie down stitch. And you just keep working your way up the row until you get to the top, and keep working these rows in these sequences or in this sequence until you fill the area that you're trying to cover. And that, my friend, is how you do the diagonal Romanian stitch. All right. So not difficult to do. Not difficult actually at all to do, and really a very useful stitch to know. So I want to share with you, and this is, this is another, we're getting kind of fancy here today. This is another, I want to show you some color combinations, essentially is what I'm trying to very unsuccessfully get out of my mouth right now. So let me switch over to a different camera so that I can show you what some of the different color combinations might be that you can use for some fall canvases that you might have, and show you what I really like about the very subtle changes in color. I'm going to be referencing DMC thread, DMC embroidery floss. Of course, this would also work if you were using DMC pearl cotton because the color families are the same. You do have more color choices in 6-strand embroidery floss than you do in any other of the thread bases, but and you can definitely use DMC cotton embroidery floss on 18 mesh canvas and on 13 mesh canvas. You just have to use more strands when you're working on 13 or 14 mesh canvas than when you're working on 18. My typical recommendation for 18 mesh with DMC with DMC 6-strand embroidery floss is 4 strands. Now, because this stitch is a cross stitch, there are layers of thread on top of each other. You might want to back down to 3 strands. You just have to reduce the number of strands that you use when you start layering different layers of thread on top of each other. And then what was the other thing I was going to share? Oh, if you're working on 13 or 14 mesh canvas, then you absolutely would need to increase the number of strands that you use, up to between 6 and 8 strands. It's just going to depend on your tension and whether it's 13 or 14 mesh. All right, so let me see if I can make this work. Y'all, everybody cross your fingers and your toes and let's see what happens. All right, so far so good. Now, I think the easiest thing for me to do is to, instead of trying to move things around, let me go here because we do have this surface that I can work with. So I can see that Bev Pitts is with us. Bev, if you can see my finger on this canvas, will you type yes in the chat just so I can be sure that everybody that I'm good? I know there's a little bit of a delay. And I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that it is, or anybody actually for that matter, if you can see my finger in the, um, in the underneath the, on top of the canvas, then that would be awesome. Yay. Okay. Good deal. Hooray. Good deal. All right. So of course your oranges being the fall colors that are being a fall color that you're going to see on a lot of autumn themed canvases. This is the colorway that I had recommended. If you read the blog post that was on the Serendipity Needleworks website, this is the color of the combination of colors that I said I was going to be demonstrating with today, and I'm going to do that here in just a minute. But this is DMC number 720, 721, and 722. Now, something you'll notice when you go to choose colors, not always is there a very subtle change between the colors in the on the palette. Sometimes you have a much bigger difference between the dark, medium, and light tone. And then sometimes, you may not have but a couple of colors in a range. So let me move that out of the way and just show you what I'm talking about when I say that. So this is a beautiful sort of an eggplant color, DMC color 29, and then color 28 is your lighter color. But those were the only two that were in that range. So I scratched around and came up with a third color, third hue, and this is 3743. Now, this is a little bit light. I would have loved for this to have been just a little bit darker, so that it would be a more subtle blend, but sometimes you have to create your own blend, and to do that, you could perhaps do something like 3 strands of this number 28 and 1 strand of the 3743, or 2 and 2 in your needle at the same time. So there are ways to get around not having a wider range of colors with which to work. So some browns or sort of rusty tones, love these 3. I think these 3 are just beautiful together. This is color 918, 920, and 922. So I've gone from dark to light, or through that I guess gradation is the right word. Okay, so then here we have, now this is an example where you have four hues in the range. So this is 3820, 3821, 3822, and 3823. You may be saying, oh, 21 and 22 look so close. And even 3820 and 3821 look really close. Could I take one of those out? And the answer is absolutely yes, you can. If I were going to take one out, I would take 21 out, and then I would have this more, there'd be more differentiation between the colors, those 3 colors, than if you kept the 3821 in place. So let me move those. Here are some beautiful sort of mushroomy browns. I love these colors. So this is number 839, this one right here, the darker one. Then you have 840, 841, and 842. So these are really good colors for animals. I see this being a great color combination for reindeer. And there are of course other animals that you could use it on, but I don't know, that just screams reindeer to me. Then we have, let's see, these are more of your, I call these my teddy bear browns. So this is 433, this darker one, then 434, 435, and 436. I think that there's a nice differentiation between each one of these hues, so I probably would not pull one of these out unless I had a very simple design component. And what you do when you have the very simple design components is you don't necessarily need to have as many ranges of color or as much shading. So all right, and then red is always something that people have questions about. How do I shade red? So many times you go into pink. Well, these are some darker this is more on the darker side. This is 814, 815, 816, and then 321. So while 321 and 816 are relatively close, I still think there's enough difference between those two to give you some nice shading. And the next color on the DMC color chart next to 321, I believe, is color number, I believe that it is 666. So let me just double check and make sure. No, actually, I'm wrong. It is 326. So 666 is more of a an orangey red. So anyway, we've got those four colors. All right, so now let's do a quick demonstration. Let me do a quick demonstration for you of um, the diagonal Romanian stitch. So I've got my needle. My needles are threaded. So let me now, let's see. I've got to do a waist knot really quickly. And I'm going to start. I mentioned that you would want to do based on what your color, based on what your light source is. You would want to start with your first row that has more of a, that's the light source. Say your light source is up here and you're working your way down or around the pumpkin, then the light is hitting here. So you want your first rows to be the lighter, then move into the more medium shades and then into the darker shades. So let me grab a laying tool as well and we'll dive right in. All right, let's see. I'm just gonna got to make sure that I'm in the right frame so you can actually see what I'm doing. Okay, I think we'll start right there. And whoops. Okay, so we're going to just do a few stitches on each row. So I'm going to go up 1, 2, 3. Y'all have to bear with me. I have to count while I'm doing this so I make sure I don't goof anything up. And then I'm going to come in and do that little stitch that's going to hold that one in place. All right, and then I'm going to come down to the next open canvas hole that's on that diagonal row, and it's, if you're going to, instead of counting intersections, if you want to count canvas threads, over 1, 2, 3 and up 1, 2, 3. This is something that I really encourage all my students to do. Rather than count holes, I encourage you to count canvas threads, because the canvas thread is actually there, something that you can count. A hole is a negative space. So counting canvas threads is really the way to go. All right, so if you notice, obviously these are going to be in line in a diagonal row, hence the name. Up here, they're also lining up in a diagonal row. So that's, as I mentioned on the video, this is a way, you can use these visual cues to help you when you're working the stitches, to kind of speed things along, so you don't have to be referring back to your stitch diagram, every stitch you take. I know in the beginning it can be a little bit intimidating when you're just learning how to use decorative stitches, but yeah, I would recommend getting a doodle canvas, just a blank piece of canvas, and practicing some stitches just to kind of get the feel for how they are executed before you go to put it on your project, because that's just going to give you a little bit more confidence in your ability to execute the stitch, and so you won't be as anxious about, or perhaps as anxious about, messing up your canvas. Okay, so I'm not going to tie anything off just for time's sake, but there are 5 stitches, 5 of the diagonal Romanian stitch worked in a diagonal row, and that's the lightest orange in that range. Now, the next color in this sequence is sort of a medium hue, and if I remember right, yeah, it's number 721. This is 722. So now I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to work number 721. All right, so now remember we said you go down one and over to the left two to work your way back up the hill. And then I'm going to count over 1, 2, 3 canvas intersections. And again, remember those little visual cues. My long stitch in the second row is going to share a hole with the short stitches in the first row. And you can see I used 4 strands of thread. I probably should have used 3 because this is going to get to be really dense. But I mean, it's going to work, but it is definitely going to be very dense. So working my way back up the hill. Then we have the next stitch. And anytime you're using a stranded thread or a divisible thread, you definitely want to make sure that you're using a laying tool. I know that it's a little bit awkward, and so you really do need to you really do need to use one because it makes your stitches, your threads lay so much more nicely on the surface of your canvas. And if you're going to use a laying tool, if you're going to use a laying tool, you really do need to have your canvas mounted on stretcher bars and or a scroll frame, and then have it on a stand of some sort. And I'm getting tangled back here because I didn't tie that off. All right, so let's see. So I'm using the Needlework System 4 tabletop stand, and there are lots of other options as well, but this just happens to be one that I have that I've used for many, many years. Okay. And I will, y'all, if you have questions, please do feel free to go ahead and type them in the chat. And if you're watching this as a recording, go ahead and type your question in too, because I will keep an eye on the chat, and I will be glad to come back and answer your questions, even after this recording or after this episode of Needlepoint TV has ended. All right, so let's see. And I'll come back and check the questions in the chat here in just a minute. All right, so there's your second row. And then now we're going to use our darkest color to do the next row. Okay. All right, so I gotta get my glasses on. Let's see, there's 1, 2, 3. All right, and then we'll go back up. And so you can see how this creates some really nice subtle shading when you use, especially when you use colors that are, really have a really good shading. You can find the colors that are really nicely shaded in a color range. I know some of you may like to use silk thread as opposed to cotton thread, and my favorite stranded silk thread, is needlepoint ink silk when it comes to having the best range of colors for shading. I think needlepoint ink silk has done probably the best job because you have so many different options within each color. So for example, if you had you wanted a blue, there very likely would be not just 2 or 3 blues in the same family. You would likely have somewhere upwards of 6 or 7. And if you like wool thread, then Appleton is the go-to for the wool thread that's got an amazing range of colors. So let me get this last little stitch in here, and then you can see how you can use, and of course, like I said earlier, you can use other decorative stitches, but this is just one example of how you can use a decorative stitch in shading on your needlepoint canvases. All right, so let me hop back over here, Um, let's see. So we have some questions that popped up. So Linda's asking, how and when do you do compensating stitches? So what you have to do when you're doing your compensation, obviously you're going to follow the painted area on your design, and you're just going to have to shorten the stitch when you hit that change in color on the shading on the canvas itself. And you can, there are a couple of ways to do it, and it depends on the design. So there's really not one pat answer for that, other than just to say you just have to shorten the stitch to fit the space that's painted on the design. Or you can, if it's not a huge amount of, like, for example, on this particular stitch, if the paint changes colors, and you can only go 2 canvas intersections before the paint changes colors, and then you have that the next area is just 1 canvas intersection, and you've got that next color. You've got a couple of choices. You could blend in the needle. You could change and blend in the needle to use multiple colors of thread in the same needle, or you could do that little short section and then pick up with the new color and just do start with the new color in that that little bitty canvas intersection. I personally, probably, unless it was going to be just a huge like glaringly not look good, I would probably do my best to adjust the stitches, like adjust the shading line, and let that go ahead and complete that stitch unit. Because what can happen if you're changing colors, let me go back and show you what I'm talking about. So hold on one second. Let's see. So in other words, if I were doing, let's see, if I were doing, hang on, we got thread spaghetti going on the back of this canvas here. Actually, let me just cut this off, and then we'll start in a different section, because I don't want to end up with a big tangled up mess. So let me switch this around. Well, let's go this way with it. So in other words, if I were going to, let me get my waist knot. Hold on one second. If I were working this stitch, and if I were working this stitch and I were going, let's see, 1, 2, I could only go that far instead of going all the way up. If I could possibly make it work and I could adjust the shading myself, then I would definitely go ahead and carry that up. What happens when you go in here and just do 1 stitch, I mean, you can do this. The compensation can get a little tricky, though. And the reason I say tricky is maybe tricky is not the right word. It can begin to look a little choppy. So if that was where the color changed, then let's see, which way do I want to go? I want to come over here. Let me get this out of the way. All right, let me get the next color. I mean, you could do it this way, but every case is going to be different. So you would just have to determine if this is going to be acceptable for you. So then you would just come here and finish that stitch unit. So you see you've got, or the other option would be, instead of doing that split like that, you could do, depending on if it were the shading, it depends on how subtle the shading is. You could come in and blend these 2 colors in your needle together. So you might come up and do, I don't know, 2 strands of the dark and 2 strands of the medium. So I hope that answers your question. All right. So y'all, there's so much that you can do with decorative stitches, and there's so much that you can do with the stranded threads. And I'm actually going to be teaching a workshop later in, it's in October, so it's next month. It's coming up soon. It's on October 21st. It's a workshop on shading your needlepoint canvases. So we're going to go over things like needle blending, and we're going to be going over things like thread painting or silk shading. And so that's a long and short stitch essentially is what that is on needlepoint canvases. So I'm going to hop over here and do, let's see, I'm going to share with you the link. If you want to hop over and check it out, there it is right there. So there's the link. If you want to hop over and take a peek at what all we're going to be covering, then I invite you to do that. And I just want to thank you so much for being here today. It's great to be here with you. I've enjoyed spending some time with you, and I hope that you will check out the blog post all about the diagonal Romanian stitch over on the Serendipity Needleworks website. And until next time, friends, happy stitching. Bye for now.